on. This is going to cause a lot of grumbling. Maybe not right now because people understand there is an immediate need for it, but later on it will. And it's a question of how long can we maintain this kind of security attention.
It's occurred to me that if these terrorists were smart now, they'd pull back and not carry out further attacks right now, hoping for the sense of security stripped from America this week to return, thereby making their work easier. What's your guess as to what they'd do?
I think a lot of them are going to ground right now. You can see in Afghanistan itself, bin Laden has disappeared. His camps have been emptied. There isn't anyone there. They've gone to ground there. And I would think that most of them who comprise part of the al-Qaeda network in North America have also gone to ground and are trying to get out.
All right. Vince Canestraro. Very interesting. Hope you'll come back.
Thank you, Britt.
Thank you. Our senior White House correspondent Jim Angle reports that the Bush administration will meet with airline executives next week. The closing of U.S. airspace and airports this week has placed additional strain on an already ailing airline industry. Northwest and Continental Airlines both announced 20% reduction in flights. Continental is furloughing 12,000 employees. Northwest says it's reviewing its staffing. U.S. stock markets have been closed for the longest stretch of time since 1915. But Monday, Wall Street will be back in business. The New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and the American Stock Exchange all plan to reopen. The NYSE tested its computers today to make sure its operations could run smoothly, and Fox News senior business correspondent Brenda Butner has details.
Wall Street almost never works on weekends, but the big board is practically up and running this Saturday. No, not trading, but testing, checking connections, both hardline and human. Come Monday morning, the U.S. markets are scheduled for business once more after 4 days of silence during which our world changed forever.
Our systems are all go.
Yet the system of buying and selling stocks takes place not just here, but under here. The World Trade Center was the nerve center of the financial district. Broker-dealers have to be able to send millions of bits of data to the trading floor. And that's not all that has to move. As many as 200,000 Wall Street workers do too. Monday, they will make a journey that is challenging both psychologically and physically.
There are plenty of signs on the floor of all that has changed since the opening bell last rang. You can actually smell the smoke of the fires still smoldering outside.
Of course, that is fleeting, maybe more so than these. And so, too, may be the first numbers that flash on the big board once the bell rings in trading after the market's longest break since World War I. Will there be a sudden sell-off, or will Americans buy in an act of unity? Even big board officials admit that neither selling nor buying will go without a glitch. But perhaps that is not what matters most.
To the criminals who so heinously attack this country that they've lost. The American way of life goes on. Business recommences.
And that may well be the true message the market sends on Monday morning. In New York, Brenda Butner, Fox News.
It has been another grim day in New York where funerals have been held for firefighters killed in the collapse of the Twin Towers. But searchers are not giving up hope for finding survivors. New York's police commissioner said today that it's possible people could still be found alive. Fox News correspondent Rick Leventhal joins us now live with the latest from Lower Manhattan. Hello, Rick.
Hey, Britt. There have not been any survivors pulled from the rubble since Wednesday morning, but yes, they are still holding out hope of finding people alive underneath all of the rubble that once was the World Trade Center towers. We can show you what's left of tower number 7 behind me. This collapsed Tuesday afternoon, a few hours after the two towers came down. The remnants of the towers resemble what you're seeing right there, a huge pile of twisted steel and rubble, all sorts of debris in there. You see a lot of smoke rising. That building was fully engulfed on Tuesday. The entire insides of that building were on fire, and there is still a lot of hot metal and other burning debris in there, even though they've been putting water on it for 4 or 5 days now. The numbers remain relatively the same throughout this day in terms of those bodies that have been pulled out. They're reporting 152 bodies now, 92 of them identified. Still around 5,000 officially are missing, but many more are expected to be reported missing in the next few days. The grim job of trying to find bodies in there, continuing around the clock, and a massive undertaking in terms of cleaning out and clearing out the debris that's piled up there. They have so far trucked out approximately 2,000 dump truck loads totaling almost 20,000 tons of debris, but that is a very small fraction of the total, anticipated to be 1.25 million tons of debris, which equates to about 25 billion pounds. Just an incredible amount of rubble and debris that has to be cleared. But obviously the most important thing here is whether or not there are survivors at the bottom of all that rubble. In the last couple of days, we heard reports that they did hear tapping and banging noises, weak signals coming from below the surface. They have been desperately trying to get to those signals. We just saw Where were you, sir, when that happened?
Right on the street.
What did you see? What did you hear?
It felt like another plane coming. Everybody took cover to run. We ran down the subway, but the dust followed us down there.
Were there a lot of people in the subway?
No, not that many, because they already had evacuated before.
Did you see people, anyone in danger, anyone getting hit when this?
Not back there, yeah, but I was running. I mean, there was nothing you can do because you just saw the thing coming right over.
Have you seen, were you able to see the tower after?
No. What do you mean, since it happened now? Since the fire?
Look at this guy, look at this guy. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. The streets have been shut down. There was very little traffic on the streets except for emergency vehicles going one way or the other. So there was not a lot of vehicle traffic in this area, but there were a lot of pedestrians on almost every single corner taking photographs and just looking at the building, which was still smoking and still on fire. A lot of police officers at the back.
Officials up there that were right near the building.
Where were you when the explosion occurred, when the plane hit the building?
I saw it from my office, as a matter of fact, down the Lower East Side.
So you came here?
Yes.
To check it out?
Help. No, what do you mean? To see if we can help, but this is...
Yeah. This poor woman. Wow.
Rick Leventhal is the one reporting on the ground. He's not able to hear me at this moment. But Rick...
Just the sound of a plane.
Starjets.
All right. What are you guys doing right now? What's your assignment? What's your assignment?
Help people.
Are there a lot of injured?
Where were we, down there?
The dust is still thick in the air. What that guy is covered with is this stuff that's all over the street. Just thick soot, ash. Just came roaring down here in a huge cloud from the World Trade Center. You see just the survivors, if you will. Are you able to talk? Can we just talk to you about what happened?
I was there when it exploded.
You were right there at the building?
Yes, a lot of people trapped. You're right.
A lot of people trapped. EMT. This guy needs help.
Rick Leventhal is not able to hear me, but from his vantage point on the ground, I think it's not clear to him what's fairly clear to us,
looks like here.
our vantage point from the helicopter, that the top of Tower 1, One World Trade Center, has literally crumbled. I can't guess how many floors, perhaps 30, perhaps 40.
The tower itself is, I think, 107 stories tall, Tower 1 and Tower 2, one in the south end, one in the north end. It appears that the first plane that hit the one in the north end. That has the restaurant, Windows in the World upstairs, and then the south towers appears to be the one that was hit the second time. That has the observation deck. That is a obviously popular tourist attraction for people. So clearly, as we see, a pandemonium. But John, the FBI and the New York City Police Department have the Joint Terrorist Task Force. They have obviously experience with this. They were able to solve the others, and I'm confident, and we should be confident that...
Let's go to Brian Wilson now. He's at the in Washington. Brian, is there a report about the Pentagon?
Well, I can't tell you about that, but I was just here in front of the Capitol, which, by the way, has been evacuated, and back toward the Supreme Court area, we just heard a low, muffled thud. It sounded like a small explosion. Sirens are going off around this city like you cannot believe. And just overhead a moment ago, something I have never seen in Washington in the 16 years I've been here, military jets are now patrolling the skies over Washington, D.C. We'll try to find out more about that explosion, but it was a low thud, and I'm now seeing that there is a great deal of activity over toward the direction of the Supreme Court.
All right.
Back to you, John.
Britt Hume is with us. Britt?
John, I'm looking now on one of our remote cameras here at a picture of the scene at the Pentagon. This is a picture looking down Interstate 395, which is, you probably know, John, is a major thoroughfare in and out of Washington that is used by commuters every day in large numbers. And we're getting a sense that from a reporter out there at the scene has just said that there's been another loud bang out there, whether that is a further explosion initiated in an attack or whether it is simply a secondary blast, the result of the continuing fire. But the situation there at the Pentagon continues to evolve. We'll keep you posted.
All right. Britt Hume in Washington, thank you. Our Rick Leventhal is on the ground in Lower Manhattan, where these scenes of chaos and utter confusion are just mind-numbing. Rick, go ahead. Rick is not able to hear me, but this is the scene in Lower Manhattan where the upper floors of the World Trade Center, Tower 1, apparently have completely collapsed.
5 blocks from the World Trade Center, and we were standing here when there was some sort of collapse or explosion, and everyone started running in this direction. Police officers, pedestrians, EMTs, everybody came running this way. I saw a woman pushing a baby carriage, running for her life, and right behind them was a huge cloud of billowing smoke and ash and debris coming this way. The smoke is obviously cleared somewhat. Ma'am, she's with DCPI. Can you talk to us for just a second? Bring us up to speed. Obviously, people have their hands full out here. It's not easy getting anyone to talk. Yeah, tell me where you were, what happened, what did you see, what did you hear?
First I went on Canal Street, I saw the fire. I saw the 2 buildings, I'm thinking it was a bomb because 2 of them. Anyway, when I got there, I tried to save people because I'm a doctor. When I tried to save people, the moment we heard a big explosion coming down, everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping, people got hurt, stuff went on top of them, and it was a big explosion, and everything got dark, real dark, like snow. You can see behind me, oh, this is not snow, this is all from the building. It was a terrible nightmare.
Where exactly were you standing when this happened?
I was standing right in front of the World Trade Center.
So you were down the block here? And
right
you came
there in the
running
middle. Right, yeah.
Did you get hurt at all?
No, not me.
Did you see anyone around you getting caught up in it?
Yeah, I was with the firemen. We got hurt. We all went inside to this dark. We was inside the building where everything happened, but we came out alive.
What's your name?
My name is Dr. Angel.
Were you able to assist anyone before this happened?
Yes, I did. I help a lot of patients. A lot of them.
Well, there are a lot more people that need help now.
Need help,
so
yeah.
if you're capable, maybe you should...
yes, I'm going to go back. I lost my ID, but I try to go back.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot for talking to us.
Thank you.
All right, that's what Rick Leventhal has for us down in Lower Manhattan, where chaos and utter confusion reigns. This is clearly a national catastrophe. There will be some response from the White House. Let's go to Wendell Goler, who was traveling with the president in Sarasota, Florida, and find out what the latest is there. Wendell?
John, the president left Sarasota, Florida. Air Force One took off just a short while ago. Mr. Bush returning to Washington to convene a meeting of his national security advisors, including the vice president, the heads of the CIA, the National Security Agency, and the FBI, and also New York Governor Pataki. It is unclear now whether that meeting will be held at the White House or elsewhere, given the explosion just a short distance away from the White House on the other side of the old executive office building, and the evacuation of the White House itself. Mr. Bush cut short a 2-day trip here in Florida that was focused on education after the 2 attacks on the Twin Towers in New York. He was briefed by his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, who phoned him after the first attack. Mr. Bush was actually reading to some children when the second attack occurred. Chief of Staff Andy Card interrupted him, told him about the attack. It was clear at that point we were dealing with terrorists. Mr. Bush cut short his trip and flew back to Washington. John?
All right, Wendell Goler, thank you. Just wanted to update you that some of the hospitals in New York are already at capacity, not accepting any new patients. There could be tens of thousands of injuries. Let's listen into what Rick Leventhal is learning down in Lower Manhattan.
Lying down, and then I looked up and I saw this huge plume of smoke and the tower just crumbling, and it just turned into a huge plume of smoke. And next thing you know, there's smoke in one tower, and that's what we're seeing right here. So, and obviously there's people are worried about the press agents and everybody else that went the other way as everybody wants this way.
When you saw this collapse taking place, could you see if there were a lot of people on the ground near the building as it was happening?
I was further north than you were, but I was dead looking at 6th Avenue, the view you see of both towers as you come down 6th Avenue.
Right.
So, and then most of this fallout stops about 4 blocks back.
Give him a look down this way, Pat. You know, it does sort of look like beyond a few blocks down, it looks almost clear, but it's anything but over here.
I live at 25 Lawrence Street, a couple of blocks from here. I'm all the time hanging out in the corner on the liquor store this morning. I saw the plane coming this way in the spot. It goes factory directly to the building.
Was this the first plane or the second plane?
This was the first plane. The second plane, this no second plane. It was a bomb. Bombed in the building, not second plane. It was a bomb. Right. Who said the second plane?
That's what we're told, the second plane.
No,
we saw it on television.
I saw everything.
All right, thanks a lot. This is...
In case you're just joining us, this is the aftermath of a horrific event that began unfolding about an hour and 20 minutes ago. A jet plane slammed into the side of Tower 2 of the World Trade Center. Then a few minutes later, another jet slammed into Tower 1. The second Tower 1, I should say, the upper floors have collapsed. They're absolutely gone.
I was in the restroom. There was a big shaking. Some of the ceilings collapsed. Looks like there was a fire in the elevator shafts. And they brought everyone down and started bringing everybody down the stairs.
So you came down from the 77th floor.
77th floor, down the stairs.
Down the stairs.
Yes.
What was happening around you? People screaming?
No, people were pretty calm. When we got down to 6th floor, there was like another shake or another explosion. Everyone started panicking, but everybody was really calm, and the police and firemen were very helpful.
Which of the 2 towers were you in?
One, Trade Center 1.
All right. And when you got to the ground, then what?
It's just like, it's like rubble and dust, like inches thick, and like paper everywhere, and they just moved us out.
How many people do you think were in the building on the floors that were affected? What do you think?
I mean, I'm one office out of 20 on that floor, so I have no idea.
How far above you or below you was the impact?
I think it was above us. I don't know how many floors. We saw it on TV, but I don't know.
What's the first thing you thought when you heard it?
Had to call my wife.
Did you? Were you able to?
Yeah, I got through a phone line. I called her. I'm talking to you because I'm hoping she's watching so she knows I'm okay.
What's your name?
My name is Matthew Guard.
Folks, clearly America is under attack. We can only hope that it's over, at least for now. Our David Schuster is in Washington, where there have been 1, perhaps 2 explosions at the Pentagon. David, what can you tell us?
John, I'm actually in our office here at the Pentagon, and according to counterintelligence sources, they confirmed that it was a plane that crashed into the south end of the Pentagon near the helipad. This is a route that commercial aircraft flying into National Airport, which is just a few miles away, they take sometimes on final approach as they come to the airport. But again, intelligence sources, counterintelligence sources confirming that it was a plane that crashed on the side of the Pentagon. Now, here in our Pentagon office, our producer Chris Wright says that there was no shaking of the building or even sounds. Of course, the Pentagon is built to withstand attacks perhaps like this one. But we are getting reports from eyewitnesses who were on Highway 110, which is just west of the Pentagon. One eyewitness claiming that he saw a U.S. Air 737 plane headed toward...
All right, let's listen in now to WTTG's coverage there outside the Pentagon. This is coming to you from the Washington, D.C. area.
Okay, thank you. Hello?
The Pentagon, the world's largest office building, being evacuated. Britt Hume, our Washington managing editor, is still with us. Britt, go ahead.
Well, John, what you're seeing there is that is the interstate, or the Route 395, used to be known as the Shirley Highway, that comes up into Washington, as I mentioned earlier, a familiar commuter route. And what you're seeing there are the military personnel evacuating the building. Some, as you know, as we noted just a minute ago, or as you could see just a minute ago, were on the run. Now, we have, John, from sources, intelligence sources, what may be a claim of responsibility here. Now, I want to caution you before I note this, that at times like these, all sorts of claims are made. So this needs to be treated with some caution. But some intelligence sources are now saying that the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine is claiming credit. In the meantime, however, the Israeli government is said by sources to believe that Osama bin Laden is responsible for the operation, and those two organizations are related, but they are not exactly the same. I suspect, John, before all is said and done, we will hear more on that aspect of all this, but obviously that is something that we're all keeping an eye on to see if some kind of authenticatable or credible claim of responsibility for these astonishing attacks is made that we can believe. Again, you're looking again at the interstate road, Route 395 that runs down past the Pentagon. That is just, of course, across the river from Washington, D.C., and the smoke you're seeing is indeed from the area out by the helipad, which can be seen by drivers as they go by the Pentagon, and you're seeing the smoke from it. It appeared from some pictures we saw earlier, John, of the building itself, that while it was clearly damaged, and in the area where the hit was very badly damaged, it did not look like the damage to the overall building, which is massive, was all that extensive.
Right. Well, that is perhaps a touch of good news. Britt Hume, thanks very much. Let's go back to our man in Lower Manhattan, Rick Leventhal, who is, again, not able to hear us, but trying to bring you from the ground the perspective of what he witnessed, felt, and heard. And I think Rick is not clearly aware, as we are, that the upper floors of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center have collapsed completely.
And, you know, it felt like a bomb hit or a plane hit or something like that. But the whole floor was... A plane did hit. Yeah, and then we looked out the window, all we saw was debris all over the place. But we thought the building was going to topple over. It was going so...
Well, one of them did.
One of them did. We were in Tower 1. We made it out.
Well, you're a lucky man.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks.
All right, take care.
Clearly, this is a nationwide catastrophe, but folks, phone lines in New York are virtually shut down, so you're not going to be able to call your loved ones. If you have any other way, perhaps email. If you have any other way of contacting your loved ones, try and do it without using the telephone, because telephone lines in New York are at gridlock right now. Let's listen in again to this eyewitness.
I have a lot of faith in God, and I hope a lot of other people made it out the building as I did.
All right, thank you. Tell me what you saw. Stop and talk to us. Where were you?
Top of the roof, 25 Park Place. Me and a super. So heard the loud noise from a jet. We look up and we see this big jet, like a 737 or a 727.
It was a 757?
About that. It was a big jet.
Yeah.
We saw it come just looking like it's sideways. At first, we thought it was just going to try to miss it. Bang! Right into the middle of it, like around the 70th floor. And then half hour later, we see the second one bang into it. We're on the roof of it. We're a block away. I mean...
What's going through your mind when you see this happen?
You see bodies flying out of the sky and you can't do nothing about it. You tell me. You tell me what you think. I mean, my heart's in my mouth. I mean, I pray for these people. There's no words to describe what's going on out there. I mean, you see bodies just coming a half hour later, still coming out of the goddamn sky. Devastating. Devastating. I can't imagine anything worse than this. There's got to be... I can't imagine. You know, everybody on the plane must have died. The floor, I got friends of mine on 104th floor, friends on other buildings. I just spoke to one of my friends a half hour prior to that, getting ready to go upstairs to go to work. It's devastating. I mean, I've seen a lot of construction accidents. I've seen a lot of bad things happen. Never seen a jet fall out of the sky into a building, no less once, but twice. Devastating.
I want to bring into the conversation General Al Haig, the former Secretary of State. General Haig, at a time like this, how does America respond prudently, with the proper amount of caution, and yet with whatever force needs to be applied?
Well, first we have to know the full limits of this tragedy, and it's unprecedented, of course. But we have to stay, above all, united and calm and ready to take resolute action, which sometimes we have failed to do in the recent past, when the perpetrators are uncovered. And we have many, many indicators of precisely who they are. This was too broadly based a terrorist act to be just a few crazies. This is a terrorist movement, and we know where they're located today. And obviously, as a nation, we're going to have to take action against them.
But clearly that action is going to be some days, if not weeks or months away.
Oh, it has to be very carefully assessed before any action is taken, of course, and we have to be reasonably assured that those that we are moving against are the perpetrators. And I think we know where to center our look. All we have to do is look at the world today with the Palestinian and bin Laden groups.
Who are the terrorists that you think are the most likely suspects?
Well, I'm not going to speculate because I don't have inside knowledge, and it would be rather foolish to do that. But I do think we have the means to assess it, and there will be many statements, many parties claiming credit somehow already have done so for the World Trade Center bombings.
Clearly, with what's going on in the skies, where even apparently innocent civilian airliners can be employed as weapons of terrorists, what is our military doing right now, General Haig? What should they be doing?
Well, they have to be on full alert, and I would have hoped that we would get some aircraft up in the air to enforce the ban on flights. That has to be done if it has not already been done, and I'm sure it has been.
We saw the same thing.
All right, General Alexander Haig, former Secretary of State, thanks for being with us. Rick Leventhal once again with our producer Carlos Van Meek is in Lower Manhattan. You cannot even see the sky there because of the soot, the ash, the crumbled concrete that is continuing to rain down after one of the two towers of the World Trade Center, the upper floors, collapsed. This after this apparent terrorist attack this morning that sent a large jetliner, perhaps two large jetliners, slamming into the Twin Towers.
Come over this way, Pat.
You can see the chaos.
We can see the top of the building from here. Oh, yeah. Oh, there it goes, there it goes, there it goes, there it goes. Oh.
When it comes down, we're...
All right. We do need to put it down now. I think we need to put it down now. Here we go.
America, offer a prayer. According to American Airlines is confirming that its Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles was hijacked today, and that its plane was the first one involved in this attack on the World Trade Center. Brian Wilson is on the phone with us now from the Washington area. Brian, what's the latest?
Well, I wanted to tell you, John, that I'm in front of the Capitol, and a moment ago, police officers ran up to us and ordered us off of the grounds and told us, and I quote, there is a plane that has been hijacked. It is 20 minutes south of Washington. This was about 10 minutes ago, and is headed this way. They are taking ultimate precautions. Now, as you know, in these chaotic situations, sometimes information gets twisted. But police officers here are saying that they believe there is a hijacked plane now headed toward Washington. And that's all the information I can give you at this moment.
All right, Brian, we had a report from you earlier that military aircraft are circling the Capitol. Is that still the case?
They have not seen them in the last few minutes, but there were military jets above the Capitol a few moments ago. Of course, you know, John, this has been the nightmare scenario for security experts in Washington, that many of the buildings in Washington, very visible from the air, are very vulnerable. In fact, the flight path to National Airport runs literally 6 blocks from the White House. So this has always been a big concern. But again, to repeat the information that I have here, Capitol Police have completely evacuated the grounds of the Capitol, and they have told us, quote, there is a plane that's been hijacked. It is south of Washington, headed this way. Now, the reliability of the information I cannot give you, but that's what police have told us.
All right, Brian Wilson, thank you, and let us know if you come up with any new information. It is hard to describe, folks. The pictures show what has happened in Lower Manhattan, but we don't have a handle yet on the devastation. I remind you again that there are perhaps 50,000 people who work in the World Trade Centers. the two towers, and those towers are virtually gone now after this apparent terrorist strike earlier this morning. How many of those 50,000 people they were able to get out, we don't yet know.
That is the heart of not just the financial district, but many national, international corporations. I mean, look at that smoke, the dust, that plume that has just engulfed blocks and blocks of lower Manhattan. You have the Wall Street Journal down there, many, many corporations and offices. So I think we must say a prayer, and our heart certainly goes out to everyone who is there right at this moment, as well as the New York City Emergency Command Center is at the foot of the World Trade Center. I think it is, John, important for us to take a moment to say a prayer, remember these people, and hope that God gives us grace.
And take a look at the poignant picture you see there. The Statue of Liberty, folks, is still standing, and I think that's important to remember at a time like this. The World Trade Center has collapsed, and the casualty figure we cannot even begin to guess at this point. Our David Lee Miller is with us, we're glad to know, from the City Hall area. David Lee, what can you tell us?
John, just seconds ago there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the second World Trade Tower has just collapsed. The debris and the smoke is so thick where I am that, again, you cannot see the World Trade Center, even though we're just a few blocks away. But it appears the entire building has collapsed. People are literally running through the streets. They are running from Center Street in Lower Manhattan, trying to get away from the smoke, which is absolutely choking. It is difficult to breathe. There are people in front of me wearing gas masks. The cell phone service is virtually non-existent. There are lines of people to use the few payphones that are available, and people are literally hysterical in the streets, worried about loved ones who were in these two buildings. Moments before the building collapsed, I was outside, and after the first collapse, the authorities began to move people away from the perimeter. They feared that the second building would collapse. They warned people of that, and they began to push people away, including reporters, including myself. And right now, there's nothing here but shock on the streets of Lower Manhattan. John?
All right, David Lee, stay safe. We are looking now at pictures, this of the second of the two World Trade Center towers collapsing after that awful, awful event. Let's just recap what's happened so far today. Two planes, one of them at least apparently hijacked, an American Airlines plane, slammed into the side of the World Trade Center a little before 9 a.m. Then, as we watch now this picture, a second plane slammed into the second tower of the World Trade Center. That tower collapsed first. It burned for a while and then collapsed. And you can see these pictures as that tower collapses. Not long ago, the second of the two towers collapsed. Now again, there are perhaps 50,000 people who work in these buildings on any given day. Not all of them would have been at work yet, but clearly a great and monumental loss of life. Also in Washington, the Pentagon has been under attack. At least one plane slammed into the Pentagon. David Schuster is an eyewitness to that and is joining us now. David?
John, the Pentagon is now being evacuated. You may be able to hear some of the sirens that are going off in the Pentagon. There's smoke billowing down the hallway. Eyewitnesses describe a U.S. Air 737 plane on what seemed to be headed towards National Airport at approximately 9:40 this morning when it then crashed into the south end of the Pentagon. The eyewitnesses describe a huge ball of fire, the plane apparently hitting by the helipad, which is near Highway 110 and Highway 395, the main arteries into the city. There have been unconfirmed reports of second explosions here at the Pentagon. We have not confirmed that, but again, the counterintelligence sources confirming that it was a commercial aircraft apparently hijacked that crashed into the Pentagon. The building has been evacuated. There are reports of safety precautions being taken at the Central Intelligence Agency, at the National Security Agency. Capitol Hill has been evacuated. The White House has been evacuated. But here at the Pentagon, I was actually in a taxi cab on Highway 110 when suddenly smoke started billowing out of the Pentagon. Very quickly, you heard ambulances and fire trucks headed that direction. Chris Wright, our producer at the Pentagon, who is on the northern side of the Pentagon, says he could not hear the explosion or feel any aftershocks or anything. Obviously, the Pentagon, a very large building meant to withstand terrorist attacks or any sort of other attack. But again, eyewitnesses describing a U.S. Air 737 crashing into the Pentagon at approximately 9:40 this morning. The Pentagon, except for some personnel, the Pentagon being evacuated, and we can actually smell some of the smoke now in the hallways here on the north side. John.
David Schuster in Washington, thank you. Britt Hume is with us once again, our managing editor in Washington. Britt, chaos and pandemonium, but how do we measure the response here?
Well, John, one thing worth noting is that you're going to hear all kinds of further warnings at a time like this, and precautions are being taken. We've just learned, for example, that police have been sent to Union Station. A bomb squad has been sent to Union Station, which, as you know, John, is located just a couple of blocks from the Capitol. In fact, it's just adjacent to our Fox News bureau here in Washington. One senses that there will be many squads and many alerts and many more than there will be things found, but nobody's taken any chances in this town at this hour after the astonishing events that have unfolded so far here today. And, of course, you've been seeing the pictures and hearing the reports from down there at the Pentagon. Who would have imagined such a thing? It appears that the damage to the Pentagon, as bad as it was, we don't have any sense of whether there was loss of life or how extensive it was. That is an attack that looks like it could have been very much worse indeed had the airplane hit in a more central area of that building. So we're now watching, of course, the Capitol building with considerable urgency. It's right out the window of our bureau here. Because, as Brian Wilson reported, police on Capitol Hill are evacuating the place, saying that there was an airplane 20 minutes away, apparently, or they had reason to believe that it was headed this way. Now, we know their jets have been scrambled and have been in the air. It is hard to know whether a plane would ever be allowed to get close to Washington, D.C. in the air with all the airports closed at the moment or not. But that obviously is something we're watching with considerable interest and worry here.
All right, Britt, I just want to update you while you've been talking. Authorities at the Somerset County Airport confirm a large plane crash about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. We're trying to deal with only facts today and not rumors, because there are plenty of those swirling around, but we do have a confirmation of apparently another plane crash about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. You've got to assume that it's related to all of these goings-on, but we don't know any more information than that. Rick Leventhal, we are glad to know, is still with us in Lower Manhattan. Rick?
Yeah, John, we basically ran about 5 blocks down Church Street north, away from the World Trade Center, as that second tower was collapsing. A similar scene to the first one, where huge clouds of smoke began billowing down the street at us. And in fact, because of the location of the tower, it actually came down cross streets. So as we were running north on Church, we were passing cross streets, and the black clouds of debris and smoke were coming towards us down the side streets as well. So we were about 5 blocks, six blocks north of where we were before. Things have settled down a bit now. The smoke is starting to clear. We've seen more injured coming our way, and there's a lot of police activity on the street. But a similar scene to what we saw earlier as the first tower collapsed. Only this time, people were ready for it, or more ready for it, and reacted swiftly. John?
All right, Rick Leventhal, thanks very much. Again, there is so much going on. It's difficult to update you, but you're looking at the cloud of dust, debris, smoke, and probably crumbled concrete over Lower Manhattan. The twin towers of the World Trade Center are essentially gone. 110 stories each, more or less. They are gone now. All of this taking place within the last 2 hours after they were struck by 2 airplanes. American Airlines is now confirming that its Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles was hijacked, and apparently that plane was one of the 2 that slammed into one of the World Trade Center towers. We don't know anything more about the loss of life, but it is going to be considerable. David Schuster is with us now, again, not far from the Pentagon. David?
Well, John, I'm actually inside the Pentagon in our office at the outer ring, and again, we can confirm for you that intelligence sources are telling us that it was a U.S. Air 737 that crashed into the south end of the Pentagon at approximately 9:40 this morning. The Pentagon has been evacuated, but we do want to point out that at parts of the Pentagon, key personnel are still here, including the National Military Command Center. This is in the basement of the Pentagon in an sort of a bunker type of a facility that is essentially designed to withstand direct attacks on the Pentagon. And we're told that officials there are still in that particular part of the Pentagon, are coordinating any possible U.S. response, as well as trying to gather intelligence information, counterintelligence information, and essentially act as a clearinghouse from all the various intelligence agencies in Washington. There have been reports of precautions being taken at the Central Intelligence Agency in McLean, Virginia, at the National Security Agency. But again, here at the Pentagon, while most of the Pentagon and its 23,000 employees have been evacuated, the National Military Command Center at the base of the Pentagon is still here. You can actually smell the smoke now in virtually all of the hallways at the Pentagon, and fire trucks and sirens going off on the south side. But where we are on the northern side of the Pentagon in one of the outer rings, my producer Chris Wright says he could not feel any of the aftershocks of the explosion. There was no noise when the plane apparently crashed this morning at 9:40. But again, most of the Pentagon has been cleared out. The smoke pretty thick here in the halls. But some officials, of course, still at the Pentagon in the offices that are designed for some of these very scenarios. John?
All right, David Schuster at the Pentagon, thanks very much. It appears, and we had the report from our Brian Wilson in Washington not too long ago, it appears Brian told us that that there was a report of a hijacked plane south of Washington, D.C. and headed toward the nation's capital. Now, it appears that that is the flight that went down about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. We told you that there was a confirmation from the Somerset County Airport. Authorities are saying that that may be the plane that Brian Wilson spoke of. Let's take you back again to New York and an absolutely horrific scene in lower Manhattan. The entire lower end of the island covered in smoke and floating debris. And what's missing? The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, 110 stories high. You are looking at the pictures from, the last half hour or so as the first tower simply collapsed on itself. And look at the debris raining down on other buildings. Imagine the horror. Now, here comes the second tower. This is the one that had the TV antenna on top, simply imploding on itself. 110 stories, the workplace of some 50,000 people. America, the loss of life here is going to be tremendous. Molly Falconer is at one of the New York area hospitals. Molly, it's got to be a scene of absolute chaos there.
John, this is an area under siege. The police have blocked off a block radius around one of the main hospitals here in New York, and paramedics are coming out onto the street asking people in the crowd to give blood. I'm sorry, the phone line's been going in and out, but they're asking people in the crowd to give blood to the people who are coming into this hospital. There are stretchers out on the streets on dollies draped in white sheets waiting for the injured to come in. I've seen ambulance after ambulance ferrying people into this hospital. It is a scene of utter chaos. The police have locked down this block. They're trying to keep people away, but people are standing at the barricade trying to find out who's inside this hospital. As far as we know, most of the burn victims are going up to Cornell Hospital. Some are going to Bellevue, but the majority are going here to St. Vincent's Hospital because they have a trauma one-level center here that is to take care of the worst of the victims who are coming in. Sirens just keep going fast, and the crowds are just getting heavier. Most of the people here can also see the World Trade Center, both of the towers. We heard the crowds watch them come down. People are in tears. They shouted watching the second tower come down, and now all we can see is way downtown billows of black and gray smoke while the sirens here just keep coming into the hospital. John, we'll keep you up to date.
All right, Molly Falconer, thanks very much. And that is perhaps something that you can do if you are watching our coverage anywhere in America. Donating blood is going to be very urgent today. The New York area hospitals are going to be swamped, and New York City itself may not be the place to try to do it. But anywhere in America, if you can donate blood, I think it will be helpful. Now, we are once again trying to find out exactly what happened in western Pennsylvania, where a plane went down, a large plane went down just north of the airport, the Somerset County Airport, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. These live pictures on your screen now show you the scene in Lower Manhattan, where the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center essentially are gone. We have with us on the phone another former Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger. Mr. Weinberger, it's good of you to join us. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
How should, you know how Washington works. What should be happening right now?
Well, I think probably what is happening, that is the city is virtually shutting down. You see police and little knots in all the corners, and all the police cars are out of the police stations. And every available fire engine is moving toward the Pentagon, and I suppose there are going to be other targets where they'll have to go to too. These rumors are floating all over the place, and it's generally a real siege situation. It's very much as if the whole city were under attack, whereas probably it's the two or three principal targets. But the cumulative effect is that of a city under siege.
Have you ever planned for this kind of an attack in your experience at the Pentagon?
The attempt is to plan for everything, and there were always various discussions of what form an attack could take. Most likely one was a suicide car bomb or a bus or some heavy vehicle being driven up to the Pentagon, as happened in Beirut and in various other places. I think an aerial attack was considered not one of the things you heavily planned against. On the other hand, the city is ringed with Air Force bases and Navy bases, and the ability to get defensive planes in the air is very, very high. And at the same time, you would do what is being done, and that is closing off the entire airspace so that you, in effect, the whole Washington area is a no-fly zone, so that any planes that can't identify themselves that get into that are to be shot down. And those are the orders. That was basically the response that was always contemplated, but nothing on this scale was ever contemplated.
You know that there are going to be cries for revenge, for a response. Can America respond immediately, and if so, how?
Well, the response has to be a response that is targeted at the people who did it. But there will undoubtedly be cries for revenge, and it's the slightest confirmation of who did it or where it came from. These people will be pursued. The loss of life has to be absolutely staggering, because the two twin towers at the Trade Center, there was not time to get them evacuated, and they're both down, and the opportunities are tremendous. Now, of course, they've evacuated the principal targets, the White House and the Capitol building, and various other points in the city. But certainly there'll be calls for revenge, and it's important that we identify the people who did it, and that they be destroyed as quickly as possible. And that's a proper response.
All right. Secretary Caspar Weinberger, former Secretary of Defense, thanks very much for being with us. Just this word, one of our producers in Afghanistan has spoken with the Taliban, the titular government of Afghanistan, I should say. The Taliban denies any responsibility. Now, that is not to say that the Taliban speaks for Osama bin Laden, but the Taliban, the government or would-be government, not recognized yet by the United States as the government of Afghanistan, is denying any complicity or any responsibility for these attacks.
Well, clearly, some terrorist experts that I've spoken to this morning say this has the signature of Osama bin Laden, that he has had pilots, although these apparently may be at least 2 hijackings, but he has had pilots on his payroll. 3 of the of alleged conspirators who were involved in the East African bombing trial here in New York had pilots' licenses. Not to say that that's what happened here, but they seem to indicate that this would have that signature. And, John, I'm hearing a figure of 10,000 here in New York City, perhaps for casualties on the World Trade Center.
And it could go higher than that. Britt Hume, our managing editor, is in Washington, D.C. Britt, what are you hearing there?
Well, you're seeing, John, that live picture from our station WTTG of the smoke and dust still coming from the Pentagon. And what we now understand is the case is in the place where that plane hit. We believe it now to have been a 737 commercial flight coming in. The walls of the the wall of the building, the outer wall of the building, and of course that building, as you know, is a series of concentric rings, so that when you hit the outer wall of the building, you're only affecting really that part of it, but that those walls are down, and you can see the gutted areas inside, damage in that particular part of that very large building. Very extensive indeed. In addition, there was an earlier broadcast report here in Washington that there had been a car bomb outside the State Department. Terry Schultz, our reporter at the State Department, has talked to senior officials who say that that is not true. The State Department has, however, been evacuated, as has the Justice Department, national monuments, and all other major public buildings in Washington in terms of absolutely non-essential personnel. So you see something approaching now here in Washington, the kind of lockdown that we have now already seen in New York. The worry for officials, obviously, is that while the airplanes have done the great damage so far, they can have no guarantee that that will be the only kind of attack that will be launched. So they have to take seriously any warning, any suspicious package, anything else that they hear that might indicate a further attack of a different kind.
All right, Britt Hume in Washington, thanks very much. We have a report that the plane that went down in western Pennsylvania is a 767. That's, of course, a wide-bodied plane capable of carrying upwards of 350 people. So there is a significant amount, the possibility of a significant amount of loss of life. However, it should be pointed out, we are hearing reports that that crash near Pittsburgh may not be related to all of this. As you can imagine, the air traffic control system is overloaded, to say the least, at this point. Nationwide, there is a lockdown on flights. No new flights have been allowed to take off nationwide for the last 2 hours. It is an air traffic controller's nightmare to keep those planes not only on the ground, but also to get on the ground those planes that had been in the air. And again, you are looking at the pictures of Lower Manhattan, where the World Trade Center is gone. The Twin Towers slammed into today in a coordinated attack by jetliners. We're seeing one of them here on taped replay. This happened about 10 minutes after 9, a jetliner slamming into the World Trade Center after an earlier jetliner, apparently hijacked from American Airlines. Here is the first of those towers coming down. This is the one that was actually hit by the second plane. It was hit lower. There was more weight on those steel girders that had been damaged. And here comes the second tower, the tower with the signature television antenna on top. Both of them simply imploding in on themselves. Our Shepard Smith has a view of much of what's going on. He is on a rooftop in Manhattan. Shepard, what can you tell us? Shepard Smith is with us. Shepard,
we are on 47th Street, high above the Fox News headquarters, 47th Street, between 7th Avenue or Broadway and 6th Avenue, on a spectacular day in Manhattan. And right over my right shoulder is the spot where the World Trade Center stood just a couple of hours ago. Our engineer, Peter Blangiforti, was standing here on top of this building, arranging to have this live broadcast set up when the World Trade Center just started to collapse. Peter, which side went first?
The east side went first, the one closest to the Verizon building side, and that went about a little over a half hour ago, and the second one followed about 15 minutes later.
What was going through your mind?
Just all the people. It's all the people. It was unreal. I don't know how to describe it. So we were setting up for the camera shot, and just to see it there 1 minute and then gone the next, you can't describe it.
Well, I was personally uptown on the Upper East Side of Manhattan at just about 96th and 3rd Street when the call came out, and probably took 30 minutes to get ready, and then began what is a very familiar trip from the Upper East Side to Midtown Manhattan, coming down 5th Avenue, straddling Central Park on what is an absolutely spectacular fall day in Manhattan. And there was a pall over this city like like you really cannot imagine. When coming down Fifth Avenue, the tunnels which leads you through Central Park from the east side to the west side of Upper Manhattan were closed. There were police officers on streets. There were women on street corners trying to get phone calls out, and men seated on benches crying. It was an unthinkable experience. And from this location, you can see almost all of Lower Manhattan. And certainly we've gotten reports of what it has been like down there over the past couple of hours. Certainly the scenes of carnage, something not witnessed in the United States history. And this will be a very long and difficult day, and the pictures to come will be overwhelming. But the important thing to remember, I believe, as a nation, is for us all to take a deep breath and remember the person next to you, and don't allow yourself to fall into the abyss which it appears those two buildings have. The New York City Fire Department and police departments are all on full alert. All fire department personnel in all 5 boroughs have been ordered to report to their firehouses. It is my understanding that all the bridges and tunnels in the city are closed, that there's no one allowed inside and out. This building on which I'm standing is the headquarters of the News Corporation, but houses literally thousands of workers on 45 stories. Initially, in the initial confusion, no one knew quite what to do, but now in this building, and I'm quite confident in skyscrapers across Manhattan, security is at the door. No one is allowed in or out without an ID. Now anyone who leaves is not allowed back in, except of course for news personnel. And the main thing that's being urged everywhere you go is calm, that this is a time to remain calm. We are hit with a national crisis unprecedented. And the word from people on the street, from the mayor of New York City and others is, it's time to put your arms around a neighbor, take a deep breath, and try to get through this. There are certainly the inevitable concerns of what will happen in this city in the days to come. Mayor Giuliani has an enormous police force of more than 40,000. The city is equipped, we have always been told, to handle any level of disaster, and certainly New York's finest and New York's bravest will do their dead level best to make sure that this city remains as calm as is humanly possible. The Empire State Building in the foreground here, as you can see, and it's my understanding that in the moments after the first collision happened, the Empire State Building was put on alert. I was listening to a radio reporter from 1010 Winds, a local radio station, which had dispatched a reporter there saying that there was an orderly exodus going on. I can tell you that for the thousands who are in this building, the exodus was orderly. The drive through the streets, an eerie calm, tears on avenues and streets as I made my way here. People, some of them wandering in front of buildings. At St. Patrick's Cathedral in the heart of Midtown, where you turn to come to this building, there were hundreds of people out front, some on their knees at the front of that building, saying prayers for the no doubt thousands who were in those buildings and in that area when the 2 jets crashed into them. Now back to you downstairs in the studio.
All right, Shepard Smith with our rooftop view here from Midtown Manhattan. Again, to recap, the Twin Towers gone now, virtually obliterated after they were struck by 2 jetliners, one of them apparently an American Airlines flight from Boston to Los Angeles that was hijacked earlier today. And Washington under attack as well, a U.S. airplane crashing just outside the wall of the Pentagon. Our David Schuster is there and has an update. You can still see the smoke pouring from the building. David?
Well, that's right, John. And we're actually, our office is on the north side of the Pentagon, and even over here, despite how vast this building is, you can now actually see the smoke in all the hallways, and we can feel it in our office. The eyewitnesses are telling us that at approximately 9:40 this morning, a U.S. airplane was headed, it seemed, towards National Airport, which is just a couple of miles away from the Pentagon, when it then apparently veered, flew too low, and crashed into the south wall by the helipad. The helipad is sort of a helicopter landing pad that is used for the Secretary of Defense and military leaders when they travel sometimes in and out of the Pentagon. And apparently on that side, eyewitnesses who were on Highway 110 and 395, which have a great vantage point of that side of the Pentagon, reported a huge ball of fire and smoke billowing out. I was in a taxi cab on 110 when all of a sudden you could see thick black smoke filling the air over Arlington National Cemetery. And as we got up close, fire trucks were screaming towards the Pentagon. The building was somewhat chaotic. There was an evacuation. Officials were, military leaders of all the services were heading out of the Pentagon. There were concerns about whether there was discussion among military leaders about whether to conduct a full-scale evacuation, where to bring the fire trucks. At our office here at the Pentagon, and also cell phone lines in the entire area were not working. It was impossible to get a cell phone. When we arrived here, we started getting reports from people inside the Pentagon on the south side, on the outer ring, and remember there are 5 or 6 different rings of offices at the Pentagon, of a ball of fire, of a large explosion approximately 9:40. At first, there were some conflicting accounts about whether an airplane was actually involved, because a lot of people in the Pentagon did not hear an airplane flying overhead. But then witnesses outside of the Pentagon who had a clear vantage point of the helipad described a silver and red U.S. airplane, according to the eyewitnesses, described as a 737 that flew too low and crashed into the side. Counterintelligence sources are confirming to Fox News that it was a commercial aircraft that was apparently hijacked and flown into the Pentagon. The damage, I suppose, could have been a little bit worse if it had scored a direct hit or it hit more in the center of the Pentagon, and it is a vast building with 23,000 employees. And while most of those employees have been evacuated, the National Military Command Center, which is in a bunker in the basement of the center of the Pentagon, is still in operation. That is the key office here at the Pentagon as far as coordinating any potential military response. Our producer, Chris Wright, who has been roaming the halls of the Pentagon, said that offices all over the place are closed, even at the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Some key personnel there are not at their locations. Even some of the guards have left, but we can assume that the National Military Command Center, which is a very secure part of the building, they are still in operation, and perhaps a testament to how big the Pentagon is and how strong it is. The people on this side of the Pentagon said they simply did not hear or see anything at 9:40 when the plane apparently crashed into the south side. But at this point, it's pretty evident what's going on. You can hear the sirens in the hallway. The offices, even on this side of the building, are starting to fill with smoke. And in fact, I'm going to stick the phone out the window and see if you can hear the warning. Hold on one second, see if I can drag the phone out there. Hold on one sec. Okay, so that's the noise you're hearing inside the Pentagon as my producer Chris Wright stuck the phone out into the hallway, and you can actually you can see the smoke just filling the air of the hallways here at the Pentagon. Back to you.
All right, David Schuster at the Pentagon. Thanks very much. Los Angeles is on a state of tactical alert. San Francisco, pretty much the same thing. In Virginia, Navy installations are under an increased security condition called ThreatCon Charlie. In New Jersey, once again, the bridges and tunnels into Manhattan are closed. Again, to recap, let's take a look at what you are seeing there in the live pictures on your screen. The World Trade Center is now essentially gone. The Twin Towers were struck earlier this morning in coordinated attacks. We had a report of a jetliner smashing into the first tower. Here comes a replay video of a second plane that smashed into the second tower about midway, shortly after 9 a.m. this morning, Eastern Time. That tremendous fireball, you can imagine, triggered a fire inside the building that apparently weakened the structural elements to the point that the upper level of the building simply could not stand. It collapsed, and there again, this is a replay of the second plane smashing into the World Trade Center. It happened as we were on the air live shortly after 9 o'clock this morning Eastern Time. Now, both towers went up in flames, and there was clearly a tremendous loss of life, but then came the catastrophic collapse. This the second collapse of the tower that was actually struck by the first plane. All right, I'm told that is the first collapse, but no, that was the tower with the tower, the television tower on top was the second one to go down. You can see the glass, the debris raining down, and imagine, folks, that firefighters and police officers were all around the base of that building trying to evacuate people as it came down. I can't think of a more catastrophic collapse. On top of that, we just heard from David Schuster, the Pentagon has been under attack. American Airlines is going to be holding a press conference about 25 minutes from now in Dallas to talk about one of the planes that was apparently involved in this World Trade Center collapse. We believe, well, in fact, American Airlines has told us that their Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles was hijacked this morning, and we believe that the hijackers somehow then commandeered the cockpit controls and flew that American Airlines plane into the World Trade Center. That would probably be, we don't have confirmation, but probably be the first one that hit.
I think, John, if I can interrupt just, I think investigators now are probably looking to see how the hijackers in this coordinated attack were able to take over the controls. Did they shoot the pilots and then jump in the seats? What happened? Osama bin Laden, sources have told me, has had pilots on his payroll. We have 3 pilots that were accused of being conspirators in the East African Embassy bombing trial here in New York City. So you certainly have perhaps investigators looking at a base of operation out of Boston and perhaps out of Pittsburgh, since you have a U.S. airplane into the Pentagon, which their main hub is Pittsburgh, and another crash outside of Pittsburgh.
Bill Daley, a former investigator for the FBI, has been good enough to stay with us. Bill, a couple of brief thoughts.
Yeah, John, first of all, the broad base in which these attacks took place took a lot of coordination. As Eric just mentioned, there may have been some involvement of groups like Osama bin Laden or others. I would go on to say that as a result of the effort it took to take these have these incidents take place, is that we will find the people responsible, is that the trail will be hot, we will go after them, but everyone needs to realize, state of calm, needs to come over the country and realize we're in control. These are incidents that have happened, we're containing those, and the government and the people will go on.
And America still stands. Let's go to our man in America's capital, Britt Hume, with some new information. Britt?
Just a few things, John. One is, as you might imagine, there is a stupendous traffic jam developing in the Washington area right now, with all these buildings being evacuated and people heading home. There was a report, remember we reported earlier that the bomb squad had been sent over to Union Station, and apparently what that was about was what appeared to them to be an unexploded bomb over there. Now, we're going to be in for a lot of this, and we need to keep our eyes open here to take things with a grain of salt. We haven't had a further report on whether there's been anything more to that than just why they went over there, but that's what it was. In addition, the American Muslim Political Coordination Council, which is a function of the Council on American Islamic Relations, that's a group located here in Washington, has released a statement condemning the apparent terrorist attack, saying, quote, American Muslims utterly condemn what are apparently vicious and cowardly acts of terrorism against innocent civilians, join with all Americans in calling for the swift apprehension and punishment of the perpetrators. No political cause, it says, could ever be assisted by such immoral acts. In addition, John, there was a report, I should say, kicking around on the air of an attack on Camp David, the presidential retreat north of Washington. Senior officials in the administration are saying that that is not true. So that's where that matter stands. Back to you, John.
Britt Hume, thanks for the updated information. Yeah, it bears repeating. There will be a lot of rumors, a lot of panic swirling around today. Whatever you can do to stay calm, gather your loved ones around them and just give them a hug is certainly is advice that I think is worth taking. There is clearly a catastrophic loss of life in the World Trade Center itself. Let's get an update now from our Rita Cosby, who is in the Washington, D.C. area. Rita, what have you found out?
Well, John, I just wanted to let you know I've been talking to FAA officials, and they are saying that they keep getting repeated reports of possible hijackings. Obviously, as you said, this is still very early on, but they're getting a lot of different calls from throughout the country. One report from Chicago, they're looking into the crash in Pennsylvania, which was a 767, a wide-body plane. They don't know if that is related or not, but they're getting numerous calls. It's obviously flooded. They said at this point, normally at this time of day, there are typically 4,000 aircraft aloft in the United States. These are international, domestic flights, a variety of ones, and these include military planes as well as private and commercial aircraft. At this point, there are only just a few hundred at this point because they have ordered a national ground stop as of 2 hours ago. It's the first time in U.S. history that they have ordered all U.S. planes to be grounded immediately. International flights are being diverted to Canada, and the ones that are domestic are being ordered to reach their destination as soon as possible. There are 450 airports in the U.S. that have control towers, and all of them have been told to alert their planes to hurry up and get in.
Rita, I want to go to Shepard Smith, who's on the roof of our building here in Midtown. Shepard?
And no, if you guys know about these fighter jets, have we already reported on the fighter jets that are flying now?
There are fighter jets, we understand, flying over Washington, D.C. Shepard Smith, again, is not able to hear me, but he is on the building roof of our building here in Midtown Manhattan and says that fighter jets are circling Manhattan.
We're standing back again on the roof of 1211 Avenue of the Americas at the Fox News headquarters, and we're watching as two fighter jets circle what is lower Manhattan at quite an altitude. Peter Blangiforti is an engineer who's up here, and he was first to see them pretty high up, I guess.
Very high up they were, and I saw one in this direction, and it went down around by the World Trade Centers, and then I saw another one coming from the opposite direction, and we lost track of that one. But they seemed to look like fighter jets, but they were flying very high.
Yeah, we can only assume that this is part of the security that's now gone into place. John, you saw the world. You were up here setting up.
Yes.
John McKay was up here setting up for this live shot when the first of the World Trade Centers fell. Tell me what was going on.
Couldn't believe it. Peter just said the tower just fell, and we were working and turned and looked, and
if we were looking from here, it would be the tower on our left side.
Yeah, the east one. Yeah, it just went into a huge cloud of smoke and dust.
So you're watching. Yeah. And then how long before the next tower?
About 10 minutes, I would say. We were just busy working and just, butterflies in their stomachs and just can't believe it's all happening. And then the next thing we know, we turn around, the other one's going.
Peter Blangiforti was explaining how the noise and the way it came across the city.
It seemed to have rumbled almost as if there was another large aircraft flying overhead, but really I think it was the collapse of the building, the volume of the explosion just coming across, just sound waves coming across the city.
The sound waves making their way up from lower Manhattan into the Flatiron District and up into Midtown, coming like a jet flying right overhead, I think is how you described it.
Yeah, just the rumblings of a jet sound almost, but it sounded more like a deep rumbling, probably from the explosion of the collapse.
It probably goes without saying at this point, as we pan back down to where the World Trade Center stood just a couple of hours ago, that communications in this city have become very difficult. There are people all over the world, no doubt, who knew people who were inside those two buildings. Some of the facts as they stack up, there are positives in all of this. In the first place, the first plane to crash allowed time for so many people, we would pray, to get out of those two buildings. And certainly before the collapse happened, there was time for a number of people to get away. If you are considering or trying at this moment to make a phone call into the New York City area or the Washington area, it's time for the good of the country to put the phone down and wait and rely on mass communications, because the people who are constructing what will be an enormous security situation now need as many lines as humanly possible. We don't have telephone lines on top. Our cell phones no longer get out. In the minutes after the first plane crashed, the phone began ringing at my house. It's the office, it's your mother, it's your father, it's your brother, it's your girlfriend. The phone lines immediately jammed throughout the city. There is a plea now for people around the world who may be watching not to use the telecommunication systems at this moment, because the people who are mounting this rescue effort need it. It was described by Peter Blangiforti as others as a collapse around a pole which stood. Peter, you were describing what looked like maybe a big support column. You can keep the camera down there. You were describing, still seeing something before the smoke rose.
Before the smoke rose with the second tower, when it collapsed, you just saw almost as if one of the large girders or beams was going straight through the building and was the only thing left standing, like a toothpick. And eventually that dropped too before the smoke engulfed everything else. But it was just a very strange, surreal sight.
Well, there are certainly reports from all over the city of what it was like in the minutes after the two towers were struck. Radio reports in the cab on the way here from reporters who were watching, people literally jumping out of buildings. Certainly there was a massive fire and smoke on many different floors of the building. The size of the jet would lead us to believe certainly that a number of floors were wiped out almost immediately. and then the chaos to try and get out of that building. But certainly there will be stories of miracles as we go through all of this. And those people who were in that building, and after the first explosion happened and the first crash happened, word of people who got out. I was listening on the radio, broadcasting live just about an hour ago, to a woman who was in the second tower to be hit. She was able to walk down 92 floors in what she described to be a pretty controlled situation. 92 floors down the west tower of the building. She was able to walk without any chaos to give a radio report live. It's my understanding that literally thousands of people in the time before the two towers collapsed were able to make their way away from that area. Mass transit was certainly down at the time, but it's a quick walk to get out of that area. They had, what, a good 45 minutes, Ann Woolsey, to begin to make their way to the north. In Midtown right now, I was looking over this building and down into, in fact, I'm doing so right now. I'm looking down onto 47th Street, right below us. This to my right here, no, you don't have to, you can't see it from there, I don't believe. Maybe you can see Times Square over here. You can't. This is Times Square right below me. This is a scene right now at 11:15 in the morning, at 11:15, when this would be a sea of tourists on a spectacular day in Manhattan, and instead sirens echo across Manhattan, and that is the TKTS stand. I believe you're looking at that now. You're not able to see that, are you? The TKTS stand, can you see it on the lens? We can't. Pan back down to where the World Trade Center was.
Numb shock all over this city and all across America. If you're watching us now, you're looking at the lower end of Manhattan where the World Trade Center once stood. It is gone this morning, obliterated after two strikes in coordinated attacks from airliners, one of them apparently hijacked from American Airlines. We are going to be getting a news conference from American Airlines in about 15 minutes. In the meantime, an Arabic newspaper, a fairly authoritative source, the editor of that London-based newspaper, says Osama bin Laden, the Saudi-born, now exiled to Afghanistan rebel leader, Osama bin Laden, according to this newspaper editor, warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interests, and he promised a very big one. Now, we cannot yet attribute this to Osama bin Laden. However, that was the promise from this fairly authoritative London newspaper.
Well, John, certainly sources that I have talked to this morning, terrorist experts say this has the signature of Osama bin Laden, that he has the money, the network, the ability to carry out this type of coordinated attack. And let me point out that in the East African bombing terrorist trial here in New York City of the bombing of the two embassies in East Africa, that 3 of the alleged co-conspirators, one is now in jail, 2 are in jail, one's in jail, 2 cooperated for the United States government at the trial. They had pilot's licenses, and they can fly airplanes. So I'm sure investigators right now are trying to figure out a possible scenario. Were these planes hijacked by bin Laden people? Did they rush up to the cockpit? You don't need a gun. You can use burst in, several of them, and strangle the pilots or something, and then take over the controls of an airplane near the last minute while you're flying, and divert the plane and smash it right into the World Trade Center towers or in the Pentagon. Clearly, that is a scenario that I would think that investigators are trying to go on right now to try and figure out exactly what happened, who was responsible for this horrible act. And I also think that we have now entered a new era, clearly a day of infamy. That we are not, in this country, clearly immune.
September 11th, 2001, you're going to remember this day for a long time, and a lot of things in this country will change as a result of what you're seeing on your screen now. Not all of the chaos, perhaps the worst of it in terms of loss of life, but not all of the chaos is taking place in Manhattan. Washington, D.C. also has been under attack. U.S. airplane apparently hijacked as well, slamming into the outside wall of the outer ring of the Pentagon. Our David Schuster is there and has an update for us. David?
John, we have the eyewitnesses describing it as a U.S. airplane at approximately 9:40 this morning approaching National Airport from a strange approach. The eyewitnesses claiming that it then slammed into the south side of the Pentagon. We've just spoken with a U.S. Air spokesperson, Rick Weintraub, who says that all of their aircraft, commercial aircraft, have been accounted for, and says that they are unaware of any one of their planes involved in this incident. So this may be a case of an eyewitness misreading the markings on the plane, but we can confirm for you that there is a large gaping 50-foot hole on the E-ring of the south side of the Pentagon near the helipad. We're getting reports from Arlington, formerly Arlington Hospital, which is now an Ananova Hospital, that injured are being taken there. The Pentagon has been evacuated. The smoke is still pretty thick here in the Pentagon, even on our side, the north side of the Pentagon, and most of the 23,000 employees here at the Pentagon have been evacuated. But again, we do not have confirmation on the which commercial airliner may have been involved in this particular incident at the Pentagon. U.S. Air says that it was not one of their aircraft, that perhaps the red markings that an eyewitness saw might belong to American or Southwest, or American or one of the commuter airlines that fly in a national airport, which is just a few miles away. But again, we are confirming that an intelligence, counterintelligence source is confirming that it was a commercial aircraft that slammed into the Pentagon this morning. There's no indication yet on the number of injuries or those killed. Some initial reports are that some Arlington hospitals are being flooded with injuries. There were dozens of fire trucks and ambulances that were streaking towards the Pentagon at approximately 9:45 this morning, and most of the employees here heading out of the building, and most of them are in fact now gone. But you can hear the sirens still throughout the Pentagon hallways. Smoke still pretty thick here on this north side. It is worth noting, though, that perhaps this incident could have been worse. There are 5 concentric rings on the Pentagon, and the one that was struck on the south side by the helipad, which is where officials land their helicopters and whatnot, is the E-ring, and apparently there's a large gaping hole. This particular ring is sort of the offices of senior military personnel, but again, no indications about the number of injuries, the number of killed, but one would presume that if the eyewitnesses were correct, and there's several eyewitnesses of some type of commercial aircraft, perhaps as large as a 737, that there would be numerous fatalities involved in this incident, and still the aftermath still being felt here at the Pentagon. The entire area shut down. Traffic has been blocked on 395 and 110, the main highways near the Pentagon, and smoke is still pretty thick coming out of the Pentagon at this hour. John?
David, you mentioned that eyewitness report that called it a U.S. airplane, and as you noted, U.S. Air is saying their plane was not involved. Now, we are just getting a confirmation from American Airlines that a second airplane of theirs apparently was hijacked, Flight 77. From Dulles Airport in Virginia to Los Angeles. It had 54 passengers on board. That may be the plane that went down outside the Pentagon. American Airlines, once again, is confirming that it lost 2 planes today in apparent hijackings. The first one, Flight 11, from Boston to Los Angeles, 81 passengers on board. And that apparently was the first plane of 2 that slammed into the World Trade Center, that first one shortly before 9 o'clock this morning Eastern Time. A second plane also slamming into the World Trade Center. Both towers of the Trade Center caught fire, and eventually both of them crumbled and collapsed. You can still see the cloud of dust and smoke that is hovering over lower Manhattan. Fires are continuing to burn. It otherwise would be a beautiful day in New York City, but this has cast a tremendous cloud over the city as well as the nation. 2 planes crashing into the World Trade Center and toppling them. Apparently, 2 planes from American Airlines have been hijacked and lost this day. We don't yet know where the third plane came from, because not only did the 2 planes crash into the World Trade Center, but one plane crashed into the Pentagon in suburban Washington, D.C., just across the river from Washington. You're looking now at pictures in Midtown Manhattan where people are trying to go about their business, but in the most stunned kind of way. You can see emergency vehicles are at work throughout the city. The mayor has a special bunker. Maybe Eric Shawn can tell us more about this. Ironically, it was always thought to be disaster-proof because it was located on the 14th floor of a building in lower Manhattan, but clearly that kind of thing can come under attack as well.
The emergency bunker, or so-called bunker, which really isn't a bunker, it was in an office building of the World Trade Center complex, not one of the 2 towers that unbelievably and so horribly have collapsed, but in a building that houses the Commodities Exchange and some other exchanges, which is at the foot of the World Trade Center. It is, I think, number 6 or number 9 World Trade Center. That is the emergency command center for the city of New York. It was moved there from police headquarters about within the last 2 years or so. That thought to be safer, much more sophisticated availability through communications, much more secure, it was felt, than the police department at that time. So that is the center. We can only hope. We have no report at the moment of the condition of the emergency center for New York City. But then again, the mayor may also be in City Hall trying to deal with the emergency service, the EMS and tactical units. I've been told through EMS that the casualties could, the numbers being bandied around this morning, John, are 10,000. Or so. 50,000 people work in both towers of the World Trade Center. This happened on a beautiful day, 9:10 or so in the morning, when people are going to work, showing up in their offices of the massive World Trade Center complex that houses banks, houses financial institutions, houses the headquarters for the Port Authority of New York, which runs the airports and the bridges and tunnels. It has also has the governor's office and other offices in the World Trade Center, built, of course, in 1973. And the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, the terrorists at that time, who were from Jersey City, part of a local mosque, drove a van laden with explosive into the garage. 6 people were killed, thousands injured. At that time, they were not able to bring it down. That was the aim. This time, so horribly and sadly, it seems that terrorists perhaps obviously have succeeded. In terms of, you mentioned the report earlier from a London newspaper that is credible in terms of Osama bin Laden. Let me also point out, we're going to get some more information about this, that terrorist experts say he has and does have pilots on his payroll, that 3 of the co-conspirators, alleged co-conspirators in the East African bombing trial, had pilots' licenses. 2 of them testified for the government against those suspects accused of, and who were then convicted of the embassy bombing trial. So does that work up a scenario that perhaps terrorists were on these planes, hijacked them, and then near the last moment were able to divert them, incapacitated the crew, the pilots, completely jumped in those seats, and then themselves just flew those planes into the buildings? I was coming to work this morning and saw the first plane, which appeared to be a 737 or small Airbus, a twin-engine jet, flying very low south downtown over 5th Avenue. I was right near Rockefeller Center. Everybody was looking up, saying it's kind of unusual. And then it banked right. Banking right would indicate it was heading right toward the World Trade Center, and it disappeared from my view. And then heard the report that, though, is a common airway from the north. That plane, if that indeed was the American Airlines plane from Boston, that would make sense. Coming from the north, coming from Boston, on the air route to make a left leg base, and then your final into LaGuardia, but then at the last moment diverted into this horrible, horrible catastrophe.
There will be apparently no news conference from American Airlines, but Mike Tobin, our correspondent, has a statement from the airline. Mike, can you bring it to us?
Yeah, the statement is this. I'll read it verbatim to you. American Airlines confirmed today that it lost 2 aircraft in tragic incidents this morning. American said the flights were Flight 11, a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles with 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots, and Flight 77, a Boeing 757 operating from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles with 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. Statement further reads, because of the heightened security due to the nature of today's events, American said it is working closely with U.S. government authorities and will not release more information at this time. The government has shut down the entire air traffic system in the United States. American, TWA, American Eagle will not operate. And a statement from Donald J. Carty, Chairman and CEO of American Airlines, says we are horrified by these tragic events. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the families of all involved. And it's got a note here about where media calls should be directed.
All right, Mike Tobin, thank you very much. Yeah. A 767, apparently, a wide-body plane capable of carrying very many more than the 81 on board, was one of those apparently hijacked. We're going to be getting an updated news conference from the security chief at Logan Airport in Boston shortly. Meantime, I want to take you down to Brit Hume, just to repeat, the nation's capital also under attack. Of a plane slamming into an outside wall of the Pentagon this morning. Brit Hume, our Washington managing editor, is there. Brit?
John, there are police sources that are saying we need to be very careful about this. There are police sources saying that there's a plane coming up the Potomac River at a high rate of speed. This would be consistent with earlier warnings that we'd heard from police sources here in Washington, not from federal government sources or from the military, that an airplane was some distance away and appeared to be headed toward the city. So that is something, obviously, we will watch with considerable urgency here. This may be a nation at this moment that it needs to hear from its government. The Secret Service is not saying exactly where the President of the United States is. We know that he left his event out of town and was headed, we now know not exactly where. We do know this, that there was a conference call this morning, presumably after the President was in the air, that was headed by the Vice President, Condoleezza Rice, other officials. And what is called the Federal Response Plan has been put in place. This was an emergency response plan for a variety of different kinds of disasters, floods, hurricanes, calamities of that kind. It involves 28 federal agencies led by the Justice Department. The Federal Emergency Management Agency coordinates on the President's behalf. Obviously, this is more of a disaster relief type of concern, but a terrorist attack response is part of what they do, and that plan is in place and is underway. Meantime, obviously, we continue to watch the horizon south of Washington to see if anything comes of these reports from police sources. We caution you, these are just police sources. We're not hearing this yet from any other federal source or from any intelligence sources or from the military. So we watch with somewhat bated breath, John.
Hume in Washington. Commerce in America is not exactly going to come to a grinding halt, but it is going to be significantly curtailed today. The markets, the stock market, the NASDAQ have not opened yet because of course, the catastrophic collapse of the World Trade Center after these two attacks, apparently by hijacked airliners. Also, it should be noted that airplanes across the country have been ordered to stay on the ground. The Federal Aviation Administration hours ago said that no airplanes are going to be allowed to take off today. So if you were planning on heading to an airport to take even an innocuous vacation flight today or something, don't bother. There will be no planes taking off. Of course, authorities are very nervous that there could be more strikes in the offing, like the kind you just saw. That apparently a hijacked airliner slamming into the second of the World Trade Center towers, a tower that collapsed a short time after you saw that explosion. The former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is joining us now from our Washington bureau. Newt, what's your reaction and what should be America's reaction to these developments?
Well, first of all, I think everyone's reaction has to be that this is a tragedy for the families that are directly involved, the families that were hijacked on those airplanes, the flight attendants, the pilots, the people who have died today in the World Trade Center and the people who have died today in the Pentagon. I think all of us have to reach out in our hearts to them. But beyond that, as a nation, this is a 21st century Pearl Harbor. This is a 21st century kind of war. I think we need to refer to it as an act of war. This was not a random event by a random terrorist. This was a systematic, complex operation of military proportions undertaken cleverly by people who have state support and who only survive because they have the support of some states that protect them. And I hope that the American government, the President, and the American people will react to this as an act of war. This will be more casualties, I believe, than Pearl Harbor. It is at least as horrifying as Pearl Harbor, and it deserves a complete and total American response to ensure that it never happens again.
When you mention the number of casualties, Newt, I'm reminded that roughly 55,000 American servicemen died in Vietnam. There could have been almost that many people in the World Trade Center buildings today. Not that all of them necessarily would be casualties, but clearly we are preparing for a catastrophic loss of life.
This is a terrible event, but it will become even more terrible if it isn't the basis of a deliberate, systematic, and total American response. This reminds us that we're all vulnerable. As you heard, people in Chicago are leaving. They're evacuating major buildings. People in Boston are leaving. Here in Washington, I walked past the mall, people leaving. I talked with a policeman at the Capitol who have sealed off our national capital. We need to recognize we can only be a free society if we are prepared to relentlessly pursue and eliminate those who would engage in this kind of war against civilians and against a peaceful society.
Newt, if you'd be good enough to stay with us, I want to bring into the conversation Bill Daley. He is a former FBI agent who worked on the World Trade Center security precautions after what we thought was a terrible event back in 1993, an event that left 6 dead and 1,000 people injured. Bill, could you ever prepare for something like this?
This is one of those scenarios, John, that is in the worst case, planning. Is that it's those things that close to an act of God, is that it's almost impossible to plan and protect against when you have a major free city with airliner routes that are right nearby the World Trade Center, to ever think that you'd be able to protect it from that type of an assault. We rely in these cases on our intelligence gathering network, our international domestic terrorist task forces and intelligence gathering mechanisms to help us. Apparently, this has let us down in this particular case, but it's not to say that we're not on the rebound, that we will not investigate and find the people who are responsible for this. And it's also not to say that this will happen and be repeated across the country. I think we need to have a state of calm and people understand that the government will secure these locations, we will investigate, and we will protect the rest of the country as best we can. But these are type of events, John, that next to nuclear disasters are in the worst case scenario planning and almost get down to the point of so catastrophic that it's difficult to develop exact plans for it. I'm sure we'll hear today stories of heroism, we'll hear stories of tragedy, we'll hear stories of people rising beyond what they were ever called to do, because these type of plans, particularly even in New York, as much as we're New Yorkers that take on a lot, this goes far beyond anything we've been challenged with to this date.
Newt Gingrich, you mentioned that there has to be a coordinated response by the United States. Obviously, it's too early to know who is responsible, but let's say that it turns out that Osama bin Laden is somehow behind this. So what does America do? What kind of pressure can we bring to bear on the Taliban government that is harboring him that we haven't brought to bear already?
Well, let me just say that we don't know yet who's done this, and I don't think we should rush to judgment. But it is fair to say that bin Laden has claimed credit for having sponsored and financed and structured earlier attacks on the embassies in Africa, for example. It is clear that 3 weeks ago, bin Laden said he would strike the United States in the United States. And the only point I'd make today in the middle of a tragedy, I think we first have to take a deep breath and recognize how big this tragedy is for the American people. That I don't think we have to become paranoid. I don't think we have to go into a bunker mentality. But for 8 years, we have said publicly that bin Laden is a major threat to the United States. And yet for 8 years, while we have launched Tomahawk missiles and we've done other things, we haven't taken him as seriously as he has taken us. And all I'm suggesting is that if we don't have a decisive response to convince observers that you cannot kill innocent Americans in peacetime without retaliation of severe proportions, that other groups and other people will decide that the most open society in the world is also the most vulnerable, and they'll exploit those vulnerabilities. I think this is as decisive a moment for our future as Pearl Harbor was, in a different way. As I said earlier, this is a 21st century opponent, not an obvious nation state, but in the Sudan, in Afghanistan, in a number of other places, we know where bin Laden's assets are, and we need to take the risk of going after them.
Newt Gingrich, well spoken. Thank you. Let's go to Edie Donahue, who has some information from our newsroom. Edie?
Good morning, John. The target this morning is America, the enemy at this point unknown. But as we were doing our show this morning, Fox and Friends, at the very end of the show, the first airplane crashed into one of the World Trade Center buildings, the North Tower. That apparently was American Airlines number 11 from Boston to L.A. It had been hijacked, apparently 92 people on board. Just minutes after that, within 10 minutes or so, the second World Trade Center tower was attacked. That the South Tower, that apparently was a 757, another American Airlines flight, they believe, from Dulles to Los Angeles. Then about 45 minutes later, it was the Pentagon. Moving on down to the Washington, D.C. area, the Pentagon is the next place attacked. As it continues, the South Wall, there's now a 50-foot gaping hole there. Apparently another airplane that was hijacked crashed into the wall that's near the helipad there, and that is where the highest-ranking officials are able to take off in the helicopter. At 10 a.m. then, just about 15 minutes after that, a 757 from United, number 93, crashed about 80 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, and that flight en route from Newark to San Francisco. Area hospitals here in the New York City area are taking in all the wounded from the World Trade Center. As you know, those the towers are 110 stories tall. While we do know that some people were able to get down from the 92nd floor all the way to the ground and manage to escape safely, there have been untold injuries in this and untold deaths. Several area hospitals say they are already booked to capacity. They're asking people in the waiting rooms to start donating blood immediately because there is a desperate need for it right now. At this point, nationwide, all U.S. commercial planes have been grounded. The planes that were already in the air were instructed to land at the nearest airport. Incoming international flights were diverted to Canada, and even Canada now, some airports in Canada supposedly have been closed. As you know, the president left Sarasota, and he is trying to get control of the situation, but it is changing rapidly. We'll continue updating you on the latest. John, back to you.
All right, Edie Donahue in our newsroom, and we should note that the Secret Service is not confirming the president's location. He is okay. He's aboard Air Force One, but exactly where he is, the Secret Service will not say. David Schuster is at the Pentagon, where there was that strike by that third aircraft earlier today. David, what's the latest?
John, we can now report that the fire here at the Pentagon has spread from beyond the E ring, the outside ring of the south side, to at least 2, maybe 3 of the inner rings. And looking at pictures now of the Pentagon, there is a gaping hole at least 100 to 150 feet wide on the south side of the Pentagon where 5 floors of the Pentagon have collapsed. The fire officials, the firefighters are pouring water onto that side of the Pentagon, but we can literally see now that a fire has spread and has broken out at least now about 300 feet down away from where the firefighters are working on the fire. And so now fire trucks are pulling up to this other side of the Pentagon. We believe this is all, of course, related to the one airline crash, and officials again now saying that all of the U.S. aircraft have been accounted for, that this was a silver jetliner, perhaps American, perhaps United, that hit the Pentagon. But again, the news from here is that the fire at the Pentagon is still out of control. Smoke is still billowing off of the roof from some of the inner rings now at the Pentagon, and the fire has also spread along some of the outer rings, spreading from the south side towards the north side. Our office in the Pentagon is actually in the north side on the E ring, and we can now see smoke coming not only from to our left down the hallways, but also to our right, and smoke still pretty thick. So this fire at the Pentagon still out of control, and literally, when you remember the pictures of the Oklahoma City bombing with the Murrah building completely sort of burrowed out like a horseshoe, that's what it looks like for a part of the Pentagon, where literally there's a huge, maybe 100 feet hole, and you can actually see the offices carved out like a giant U on the side of the Pentagon. The Pentagon, of course, there's the concentric rings where all the walls are connected, and now suddenly there's this giant hole and a fire that clearly has spread to some of the inner rings of the Pentagon. The Pentagon was evacuated at about 10 o'clock this morning. Some 23,000 employees cleared out. The reason that the fire uncontrolled might still be a problem is that the people who remain in the Pentagon, aside from a couple journalists here, includes officials at the National Military Command Center. They have a bunker in the basement of the Pentagon in the center of the building. Those are the officials that would coordinate a military response. Those are the officials that might coordinate the dispatch of some of the fighter jets that reporters have seen flying over New York and flying over Washington, it might at some point, I suppose, become a problem if the fire continues and they've got to start pouring water on the center of the Pentagon. At that point, perhaps there may become some potential problem for the officials that
Let's
are still
go
here.
to David Schuster in Washington. Thank you. Let's go to Logan Airport in Washington. This is a security news conference.
Logan Airport. We've closed the airport to all arriving and all departing flights. We've increased our security measures. We've shut down all the construction sites within Logan Airport, both airside and landside. And we've shut down all security checkpoints and removed all passengers who had been previously screened out into the non-secure part of the airport. We've activated our Family Assistance Center at the Hilton Hotel based upon some reports that some of these flights may have originated from Boston. We're asking the media's assistance to notify any family members that may have had families flying on those flights that we've had various reports on to call these following numbers. American Airlines, 800-245-0999. Secondly, family members can call a Massport number, 617-568-3100. We've also urging people not to come to the airport at this point in time. We've increased the shuttle buses from the terminals to the MBTA Blue Line stop, and the MBTA has increased the frequency of subway transportation. We are in close communication with the FAA, the FBI, State Police, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that's all I have right now.
Joe, you've got to tell us more about these planes that left this morning.
What flights do you have reports on?
The flights, I cannot confirm or deny any flight numbers because I have not received official notification on any flight numbers.
So how can we get people to call
In.
these numbers?
So it'll be everybody who's got a flight.
Okay, I do believe several of the media outlets are broadcasting several flight numbers. I believe they're broadcast flight number 11, American Airlines.
Is there a second flight out of Boston
Involved
in this?
I don't know at this point in time.
Were the passengers hijacked?
I cannot confirm that.
Has the airport accounted for all outbound flights?
That's outside of the scope of the airport's responsibility. We're leaving it up to the FAA to conduct that activity.
Joe, what is the code? Joe, what is the code Fort Knox? We have reports of employees screaming Fort Knox around the airport at the time that the planes went into the World Trade Center.
I don't know what that means. Doesn't mean have any connotation here at Logan Airport.
What about planes that are flying in here? Are they being rerouted somewhere else?
Aircraft were flying into Logan Airport. We did take some arrivals, but now since the airport is shut down, these flights will be diverted to Canada.
They're not taking flights either, would you?
Are you screening passengers who were let off their airplanes due to terminal issues that remove them to another area?
Remove them from another area, yes.
Where are they now, and what are they doing?
They're being directed to seek either public transportation or their own transportation out of the airport. Leaving the airport? No.
How long do you anticipate that the airport to be closed?
It's indefinite at this time. We'll be meeting with the FAA. We'll be conducting an analysis of our intelligence that we have. We'll make a determination later on this afternoon. Pardon me?
All right, that is the situation at Logan Airport in Boston. One of these planes that was apparently used in a hijacking that then slammed into the World Trade Center. Both towers of the World Trade Center are gone after being attacked apparently by two separate hijacked planes. One of those planes, an American Airlines flight from Boston to Los Angeles. In the meantime, folks, we should tell you that United Airlines is saying it is concerned about Flight 175, that also a flight from Boston to Los Angeles. There is no word on what has happened to that plane. It was due in L.A. at 11:16 Pacific time, and a spokesman for United Airlines would not say if they know where that flight is. They are working with the FAA on it. So there is the possibility that we may not be done yet. This after 2 airplanes smashed into and eventually obliterated the World Trade Center, and another smashed into the Pentagon. All of those buildings still disastrously involved in flames. All right, the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, and Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott have been taken to safe locations. Minority Leader, I should say. President Bush is also safe aboard Air Force One. The Secret Service will not say where he is for obvious security concerns. We're quite confident that when the president gets a chance, he will be making some kind of statement. But the president is safe. The Secret Service is simply not saying where he is. Also, the Minority Leader of the Senate, Trent Lott, and House Speaker Denny Hastert, we know have been taken to safe locations as well. Let's get an update on the situation in Manhattan. Molly Falconer is at St. Vincent's Hospital. Clearly there have been perhaps thousands of casualties today when those 2 towers came down. Molly, what can you tell us?
John, this is a hospital under siege. This block is under siege. Police have got the entire area blocked off with what looks like police barriers. So far, we have about 152 people who have come into this hospital. People are out in...
We lost communications with Molly Falconer. You can understand why. It is a chaotic day, and many of this city's and this nation's communications infrastructure, satellite dishes, television towers, and so forth, were located on top of the World Trade Center. And the World Trade Center, both towers, are essentially gone now, a smoking pile of rubble. As you can see, that smoke column still billowing out of lower Manhattan. Rick Leventhal was in downtown Manhattan when the buildings came down and has an update for us from lower Manhattan. Rick?
Well, John, we're on Church Street at Reed Street, for those of you familiar with lower Manhattan, just a few blocks away from World Trade. Still thick black smoke billowing from the scene where both towers collapsed. Again, just a few blocks away from us. We were standing out here on Church Street when both towers came tumbling down. And each time there was a huge cloud of smoke and debris that came roaring down this street, and everyone literally ran for their lives. At this point, the police have been efforting to establish a perimeter. They're trying to keep people back and make sure that no one interferes with their job, which is to try and secure the area and then get inside that World Trade Center rubble to see whether or not they can locate any survivors who may have been inside the building or just outside the building when it came tumbling down. We want to bring in Mark Walsh, who's a freelancer for Fox. You live just a few blocks away and witnessed.
Dude, I live on the 43rd floor of a building which is 5 blocks from the World Trade Center itself. I witnessed the entire thing from beginning to end.
People talk about how it looked like a movie. I know when I came walking down here early this morning and saw both towers on fire and people on every street corner, it was like a movie, but you watched the planes hit the towers.
I was watching with my roommate. It was approximately several minutes after the first plane had hit. I saw this plane come out of nowhere and just ream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
Obviously, there were a lot of people inside the buildings at the time.
2 guys from the 7th Precinct, the 1st Precinct, the fire department right here, the 7th truck, those guys are all right there at ground zero when those things went down. And God bless, I know there's a lot of guys there that were around there, and hopefully they made it out.
What was happening around you, in the streets around you, as this was all going down?
Absolute pandemonium. From my viewpoint up 43 floors, I could see people running like ants, just absolutely scurrying for their lives. Billows of smoke coming through the streets, just walking down the street, just pushing everybody back. And then several minutes after, it looked like it had just snowed over the entire area.
Yeah, the debris, the soot was thick on the street. There's still a dusting of it out here. But when I was standing here and the towers collapsed, we saw police officers running for their lives, screaming, "Get back, get back, get back!" And I'll tell you, that's a wake-up call when you see cops running for their lives, and people too, women's pushing baby carriages, that sort of thing.
Well, you had the first tower first. That one, when that first went down, it just pushed everybody back, and it was a good 15 minutes before the second tower finally collapsed. Yeah. And it was just overwhelming, and by that point, it was just insane.
Well, hearing a lot of similar stories from people who were inside the building. One gentleman we spoke to earlier today, John, was on the 77th floor and said it was a relatively orderly evacuation at that point after the first plane hit the first tower. Everyone going down the stairs, not a lot of panic. But when they got to the 6th floor, he says they felt a second shake, and then people started to really be concerned. Obviously, there were people in the building at the time of this, and some of those people, they haven't recovered them yet. And that's a big issue right now, is trying to get the rescue workers and the emergency crews to the building. There were police officers there and emergency crews there when this was all happening, and they were right at ground zero when it all went down. Can we talk to you? What's your role out here right now?
Just standing by right now. Can't say what role I'm playing right now.
Well, there's a lot of standing by. There's also concern that some of these other buildings might actually come down. This building right here with the glass that you see, the nearest tall building, that has structural damage as well. We saw a lot of glass broken out, and a corner of the building appeared to be in distress, and there's concern that there might actually be another collapse of that building. And I can also tell you that when we first got here, we were a few blocks up. We could actually see debris from one of the planes on the street, a huge gear at one point, looked like a piece of an engine at another point. So that debris is still littering that area up there. They had roped it off with police tape, and they had FBI agents out there, and that was just before the first tower came tumbling down and everyone went running away. So there's evidence out here. There's a lot of work left to be done, and as you can imagine, the streets are a bit chaotic at this point. But I just want to show you one drastic difference looking north as opposed to looking south. Blue skies, clear streets, not a lot going on over there, but then come back around this way, Dan, and you'll see just smoke billowing from the scene. Still obviously a major disaster waiting to be cleaned up. Back to you, John.
All right, Rick Leventhal in Lower Manhattan, thank you very much. A dark day in America, September 11th, 2001. 2 planes strike the World Trade Center, obliterate it. It has collapsed. Another plane hits the Pentagon. It is still on fire, and we may not be done yet. Britt Hume, our Washington managing editor, is in D.C. Britt?
John, just some notes from our State Department reporter Terry Schultz. All U.S. diplomatic posts worldwide have been notified of what has happened here and have been encouraged to take what is called appropriate action. Ambassadors in such a situation have the right, should they choose to close embassies. It's worth noting here that Secretary of State Colin Powell is out of the country. He was down in Lima, Peru, is on his way back. He has released remarks saying that this is a terrible tragedy and adding, this is from Colin Powell, Secretary of State, the U.S. government will find those responsible. At the State Department, which has been largely evacuated, it's worth noting that Deputy Secretary of State, and now for the moment at least Acting Secretary of State Richard Armitage, is there and has elected to stay in the building. So that is the state of play here as we continue to watch fire, which, as you noted, is still burning at the Pentagon, and we watch, obviously, the southern skies to see whether anything comes of this report of a plane bound here. I should add to that, by the way, this report to this business about a plane being on its way here, that that Senator Kent Conrad, member of the Democratic leadership on the Hill, chairman of the Budget Committee, told our Colin Spencer just a short time ago that he was aware that 16 U.S. warplanes had been scrambled and were in the air in this area. So any airplane, I think, that attempts to attack Washington or crash into it is probably going to have to contend with them, and I wouldn't want to bet that it would ever happen. But it does raise the possibility, of course, of an ugly incident in the skies in or near Washington. John?
Britt, we know that President Bush is okay. We know he is on board Air Force One, but it would seem that they are not going to be bringing him back to Washington at this point?
John, I don't think we know that, and I think that that there's a very great likelihood that the Bush administration will want to have him here and in familiar surroundings and seen in familiar surroundings as soon as possible in an effort to calm the nation. This is a nation right now, mind you, except for the things that we have been able to quote, that except for the remarks and the additional remarks that we heard from President Bush earlier this morning, just before he took off from down in Florida to come back here, this is a nation that has not heard publicly from its government And at such times, obviously, it is characteristic of a government that you send somebody out, they stand before a camera, they tell you what the state of play is, they furnish information, they seek to assure people. Under these circumstances, with people evacuating buildings in Washington and everybody on a high state of alert, it's understandable that wouldn't have happened. But one has to imagine that the administration will want that to happen as soon as it is safe for it to happen. So I would imagine that the president is headed in this direction, whether he is headed to the Andrews Air Force Base or outside Washington where he would normally land, or some other location. Obviously, we don't yet know. We got an eye on that for sure, though.
Is there a broadcasting capability aboard Air Force One? Could he address the nation from the plane if he chose?
Every known form of modern communication is there, but my guess is, John, that he'll want to be seen. I don't think he wants to be broadcast, you know, with Americans in the streets and others, people within government buildings on fire and so forth. My guess is that he's going to want to be seen, but we'll see about that. He could, of course, broadcast from Air Force One if he chose to.
Britt Hume, our Washington managing editor. The pictures tell the story, folks. It is an awful day in America. Your lives, safe to say, will change from this day forward. Newt Gingrich called this a 21st century Pearl Harbor, and that may be an understatement. There could be perhaps, well, on a given day, there would be 50,000 people working in the World Trade Centers, and both of those towers in that World Trade Center are gone now after an apparent terrorist strike. Another terrorist strike at the Pentagon. That building is still on fire. Keep it here on Fox News Channel for the latest.
Good morning, John. As you said, America has been under attack today. Secretary of State Colin Powell, who had been in Peru, is now heading home. The president, we have been told, is safe, but we do not know where he is. This morning at about 8:50 Eastern Time here on the East Coast, the World Trade Center tower, the north one, was hit, apparently by American Airlines Flight 11, which was en route from Boston to LAX, hijacked 92 people on board there. 15 minutes later, the other tower, South World Trade Center, hit. Also apparently by an American Airlines plane. This one, we believe, from Dulles to Los Angeles, 64 people on board that plane. At 9:45, the Pentagon hit. The south wall, that's the area where the helipad is. There's now a gaping hole of about 100 to 150 feet there. The sirens still wailing in the Pentagon. As we know, key personnel are staying in the Pentagon trying to keep control of the situation. Just about 15 minutes after that, 80 miles southwest of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, another airplane crashed. That one believed to be United Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco, a 757 with 54 people on board. Just shortly after that, the South World Trade Center collapsed. That was the second building hit this morning. It had been hit lower, and it just gave way. And about 15 minutes after that, the North World Trade Center collapsed. It is incredible for those of us who covered the World Trade Center bombing back in the 90s to take a look down now and at first see that scene replayed, and now those World Trade Center buildings absolutely gone, all 110 stories. 50,000 people, as you mentioned, work in those buildings. We do not know how many of them were able to get out safely with their lives, nor how many are injured. We do know that New York area hospitals, several of them say they are full. They're asking anyone in the area to donate blood as soon as possible, saying there is a critical need for it. We also know that all U.S. commercial airplanes have been grounded. That is the first time in history this action has been taken. We know that some airplanes were diverted to Canada, including some incoming international airlines, airplanes that were bound for the U.S. Most federal, or all federal, and most state buildings here in the U.S. have been closed, and most major landmarks, including Wrigley Field in Chicago, the Bell down in Philadelphia, the Merchandise Mart in Chicago, those areas also have been closed. Here in Manhattan, all major buildings are in a state of very heightened security. People are being required to show ID, and if they leave buildings, in many cases, not being allowed to return in. The president, as we said, is apparently safe. He left Sarasota, Florida, where he had been attending an elementary school, reading a book to children when he was first notified of the original attack on the World Trade Center. We do not know where he is at this point. Newt Gingrich says this obviously is an act of state-sponsored terrorism. As you said, John, he's likening it to the attack on Pearl Harbor. And meanwhile, Tom Daschle, the Senate Majority Leader, saying that the president is getting everyone's full support. We will update you as soon as we get more information down here. Right now, John, back to you.
Edie Donahue in the Fox newsroom, thank you very much. Again, continuing to keep an eye on the situation unfolding in downtown Manhattan, where the World Trade Center workplace on a normal day of 50,000 people is gone, obliterated by 2 strikes from those 2 airplanes today. Also now, Washington, D.C., the Pentagon still on fire after another airplane apparently was hijacked and employed as a flying bomb to attack the nerve center of our nation's military. David Schuster is in the Pentagon and has this late report for us. Dave?
John, we can report for you that the Pentagon fire is still out of control. Flames have started now about 100 feet away from where it's clear you can see where the plane hit the south side of the Pentagon. Eyewitnesses describe a silver commercial jetliner, possibly a United Airlines. It's not been confirmed, but a silver commercial jetliner slamming into the south side of the Pentagon this morning at approximately 9:40 a.m. It hit the outer ring of the Pentagon. There are 5 rings of the Pentagon, and at this very moment you can literally see a hole in the side of the Pentagon of perhaps 150 feet wide, where 5 floors in that hole have literally collapsed. We can see that flames have spread to the center part of the Pentagon, to some of the inner rings. In addition, on the outer ring, the E ring that was initially hit by that plane, now about 100 feet away, flames are leaping out of some of the office windows there. Smoke has been pouring through the Pentagon hallways for much of the last hour and a half or so, and about 15 minutes ago, some of the smoke started coming in from another side of the Pentagon. We're sort of smack dab there in the middle. But in any case, there are plenty of fire and rescue on the scene. Local hospitals reporting dozens of injuries being taken there from the Pentagon. One can only imagine how many fatalities there must have been if indeed it was a commercial jetliner that slammed into the side of the Pentagon. While most of the Pentagon has been evacuated, we can report that military officials are telling us that the U.S. Joint Forces Command in Norfolk, Virginia, reports that the Atlantic Fleet, which is the largest collection of military assets on the East Coast, has now gone to threat condition Charlie. This is second from the top. Only Delta is higher. The Air Combat Command is located in Norfolk, Virginia, and they have responsibility for coordinating United States-based military assets in support of civilian agencies like the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Department of Justice. There's a group called the Joint Task Force Civil Support, which has its headquarters in Norfolk, which is going to coordinate what assets will go where to sort of secure areas such as the Pentagon and other areas in the Washington area and the New York area to help with the aftermath of the incidents. But again, the Air Combat Command located in Norfolk, Virginia, and other agencies of the U.S. military are now at threat condition Delta. This is second from the, I'm just being told now that that is the highest threat condition that the military has, threat condition Delta. We had initially reported that the Atlantic Fleet was at threat condition Charlie. Threat condition Delta, John, is the level at which the United States military goes to when it declares, or when the president declares, or when the military perceives an act of war. So the military is now at the same level that it would be if the United States was engaged in a war. But again, here at the Pentagon, while most of the employees of the Pentagon have been cleared from this building, there's still the National Military Command Center, which continues to operate in the base of the Pentagon, a secure bunker, if you will, in this Pentagon, which is, of course, built to withstand these sort of attacks. And while the smoke is pretty thick in our side of the building, we can tell you that at 9:40 this morning, when eyewitnesses described this jetliner slamming into the side of the Pentagon, that people here, including our own producer, said they did not hear or see anything. There were no shock waves. There was no sound. There was only a large plume of smoke. And then came the reports from inside the Pentagon that the Pentagon was on fire. And I can tell you at this point, the Pentagon is still on fire, that the fire has not been contained. It has spread to some of the inner rings of the Pentagon, as well as spreading along some of the outer rings. And again, just to report that the Atlantic Fleet, some of the military command and control are now at ThreatCon Delta. That is the largest threat level in the United States military. It's the threat level which the military goes to when it is engaged in a war. John, back to you.
All right, David Schuster reporting live from the Pentagon. Thank you. The question, of course, if America is in fact under attack, as it clearly is, how does the military respond? They are in that threat condition Delta, but no one knows where or how at this point to respond. Let's go to my colleague Shepard Smith, who has a bird's eye view of what's happening in Manhattan from Midtown. Shepard?
John, as you've been getting the updates from Washington and other places, we've been watching the streets of Manhattan. There is certainly concern of how people might react. And I can tell you that at this moment, the initial reaction was calm, and now Manhattan has taken on a whole new sort of flavor. I want to take this camera because I can't see what you see. I'm going to take the camera and show you around a bit as well as I can. We're going to begin. We're on the top of a building at 47th Street and 7th Avenue, or 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. This is 42nd Street. And you can see there was a lot of traffic in this street until a short time ago, but now you can see 42nd Street at the corner of Broadway has become a sort of sea of people. At this time of day, midday in Manhattan, this would normally be on a Tuesday afternoon, a very busy traffic area. It is not today. I'm going to pull out over here and take you, this is 47th Street, panning now, going up towards 7th Avenue. Now, this avenue is northbound, as you can see, and traffic is pretty well gridlocked there. There's very little of it, actually. And looking over toward the Hudson River, there's very little traffic across all of Manhattan. Now, we are looking right now over the Hudson River west in Manhattan, panning around now in the skyscrapers. This is where the World Trade Center stood, and down here is the TKTS building. This is another high traffic area in Midtown